She did not ask for a chair. There were 3 open seats along the east wall of the waiting room, and Miriam Zook walked past all of them before choosing the one farthest from the television. She set her paper bag on her lap. She folded her hands on top of it. She waited. She had come to accompany Emma Lapp, 61, bad knee, bad English, too proud to say so, who was somewhere behind the intake desk filling out forms she couldn't read without help. Miriam would help when they called her. Until then, she would sit with her hands folded and her paper bag on her lap, and she would not bother anyone. That was the plan. In 11 minutes, a 7-year-old girl named Ada Lapp would stop breathing in this room. In 14 minutes, the nurse behind the desk would be shouting for anyone at all, who knew what they were doing. In 16 minutes, the woman in the plain grey dress and the white cap, the woman who had not moved from her chair, the woman that 3 different people had looked past without seeing. That woman would already be on the floor with the child, working, and she would not stop until Ada Lapp took a breath on her own. And the doctor who had told her to sit down and stay out of the way would spend the rest of her career looking at that moment and trying to understand what exactly she had seen. This is what she saw. The drive from the Zook farm to the hospital took 40 minutes in Emma Lapp's son's truck, which he had left idling in the yard because he had 4 other children to manage and couldn't come himself. Miriam had never minded the drive. She had done it twice before, once for a broken collarbone, once for a birth that turned complicated too fast for the midwife to handle alone. Each time, she had sat in the passenger seat and looked at the power lines and the flat winter fields and felt the particular quiet of someone traveling between 2 places where they are needed. She had grown up 12 miles east. She had left at 20, left in a way that still had a name in her community, though no one used it to her face anymore. She had gone to Baltimore. She had spent 12 years building a version of herself that wore scrubs and spoke in acronyms and understood what a CT scan was showing you before the radiologist finished the report. 4 years of pre-med, 4 years of medical school, residency, the kind of accumulation that happens so gradually, you don't notice it until you look back and see how far you've come from the person who left. Then Daniel died. And she came back. Not the way people come back from Rumspringa, unsure and guilty and grateful. She came back the way water comes back to level. She packed what fit in a single bag. She drove to Lancaster County. She stood in her mother's kitchen for a long time without saying anything, and eventually her mother said, "You're staying." And Miriam said, "Ja." And that was the whole negotiation. That was 2 years ago. She had not touched a stethoscope since. She had not read a chart. She had made elderberry tincture and helped with births and sat with the dying and kept her hands busy in ways that cost her nothing she wasn't willing to spend. Today she had come to sit with Emma Lapp and help her read the forms. She adjusted the paper bag on her lap and watched the television on the wall without watching it, and she was perfectly calm, and the room around her was perfectly ordinary, and Ada Lapp was sitting 2 chairs away eating crackers from a Ziploc bag her mother had packed, and there was no reason to think anything was about to happen. There's something you need to understand about what Miriam Zook was doing in that chair. She was not hiding. People talk about it later, the plain dress, the cap, the paper bag, as though she was wearing a disguise, as though she had chosen to look like someone who would be ignored. That's not what it was. She dressed the way she dressed because that was who she was. She had come home and she had chosen this. The cap was real. The community was real. The life she lived, the early mornings, the wood stove, the garden, the work of hands, that was not performance. She had looked at 2 versions of herself, and she had chosen one, and she did not spend her days second-guessing it. But the other version was still in there. That's the part that's harder to explain. She had been, for more than a decade, someone who could walk into a trauma bay at 2 in the morning and make decisions that had no good options, only less bad ones, and make them fast. That doesn't leave you. The knowledge, the pattern recognition, the part of the brain that looks at a person and catalogues what's wrong before the conscious mind finishes forming the question, that part doesn't punch out when you change clothes. She never talked about it. Not to her mother, not to her bishop, not to the women she sat with at quilting, not because she was ashamed, because it wasn't relevant. She was Miriam Zook. She made elderberry tincture. She helped at births. She had made a choice about her life, and she was living it. The reason she would never have walked up to that triage desk and said, "I'm a former trauma resident and I can help." The reason, the real one, had nothing to do with humility and nothing to do with the community's feelings about the modern world. It had to do with Daniel. She had been in that hospital. She had been 3 floors away. She had been working, doing exactly the thing her training told her to do, and her brother had been dying in a room with his name spelled wrong on the whiteboard, and no one had connected the 2 facts until it was over. She had left medicine because medicine, for all its systems and protocols and credentials, had let Daniel die without anyone who loved him in the room. Not because of malice, because of the ordinary, catastrophic failure of a system that is very good at bodies and very bad at people. She had come back to a community that was, whatever its limitations, extraordinarily good at people. She was not going to march up to a hospital triage desk and reinsert herself into the system that had taken her brother. She was going to sit in her chair and wait for Emma Lapp and go home. That was the plan. Ada Lapp ate her last cracker, and her mother looked over, and something in the child's face made the mother's hand stop moving. It happened fast, and then it happened faster. Ada dropped the Ziploc bag. She made a sound. Not a cry. Something smaller, a kind of compression, and her mother grabbed her arm, and the child's lips were already the wrong color. Not blue yet. That particular gray that comes before blue, the one that tells you the clock has started. Miriam was moving before she decided to move. The mother, Rachel Lapp, 32, the same frightened face Miriam had seen on 100 mothers in 100 moments, was shouting toward the desk. The nurse on triage looked up, looked at the child, reached for the phone. Miriam set her paper bag down on the chair. She walked to Ada and she went to one knee on the floor beside her, and her hands were already on the child's neck, checking for hives, before she registered that she had knelt down. "She's going into anaphylaxis," she said, not loudly. To the room, to the nurse, to whoever was listening. "She needs epinephrine. Now." The nurse behind the desk started toward them, and then a door opened, and Dr. Carla Sievert walked through it. Sievert was in the middle of something, phone in hand, lanyard swinging, the tight expression of a person who has been interrupted 3 times in the last 20 minutes. She took in the scene in the waiting room, child on the floor, mother crying, and a woman in a plain grey dress and a white cap, crouched over the child with her hands on her neck. Sievert's eyes went to the cap, to the apron, to the absence of a badge, a phone, anything that marked Miriam as belonging in this building. "Ma'am," clipped, already turning to the nurse. "Ma'am, please step back. We have this." Miriam did not look up. "She's got urticaria spreading up her left arm. History of bee sting allergy. Look at the medical bracelet. She needs 0.3 milligrams IM right now, and she needs it before she loses the airway." "Ma'am." Sievert's hand went to Miriam's shoulder, not gentle, not cruel, the automatic grip of someone accustomed to moving people out of the way. "I need you to step back. You cannot be on the floor with this patient." Miriam looked up then. She looked at Sievert with an expression that was not anger, and was not pleading, and was not the expression of a woman asking for permission. It was something quieter than all of those. It was the expression of someone who has already decided what is going to happen, and is simply giving the other person a moment to catch up. "She has 30 seconds, Miriam said. "Maybe less. Look at her neck." Sievert looked, and to her credit, "This matters. It will matter later." To her credit, she looked. She saw the urticaria. She saw the child's chest working too hard for too little air. She turned to the nurse. "Get me the epi from Bay 2. "The crash cart's in the hall," Miriam said. "Left side, second drawer." Sievert stopped. The nurse had already turned toward the hall. She had already moved because the woman in the grey dress had said the words with the certainty of someone who had stood at that cart before, in a different time, and she had responded to that certainty before she had a chance to think about it. Miriam did not wait. She pressed 2 fingers to Ada's carotid, and she looked at the clock on the wall, and she counted, and she did not look away from the child's face. 3 nurses had come out from behind the desk. A security guard was standing near the door, uncertain, watching the woman in the plain dress with the expression of a man who has been told to remove a person and is no longer sure whether that is what's happening. Ada's mother was on her knees on the other side of her daughter, both hands over her mouth, not making a sound because Miriam had said quietly, "Stand close, but give her air." And Rachel Lapp had done it without question, the way people do things when the person speaking sounds like they are somewhere beyond argument. The nurse returned from the hall at a run, crash cart rattling behind her. Sievert had not moved from beside the child. She looked at Miriam's hands, the economy of them, nothing wasted, nothing uncertain, and she looked at Ada's neck, and she did not say anything for a moment. "I'll take over from here," she said. "You have the epinephrine," Miriam said, "ain't getting it now." Sievert pulled the drawer open herself, drew up the dose without hesitation. "Right lateral thigh. Yes, I'll hold her." Sievert administered the injection. Miriam held Ada still. The child gasped once, twice, and then in the specific way that parents remember forever, because it sounds like something returning from somewhere far away. Ada Lapp started crying. Real crying, loud crying, the kind that tells you the airway is open. Rachel Lapp made a sound that had no name. Sievert was already calling for a gurney, already managing the room the way she'd been trained to. And that was right. That was exactly right. And Miriam sat back on her heels and looked at her own hands and let the room reorganize itself around the medical team. She stood up. She picked up her paper bag from the chair. She went back to her seat. The security guard watched her sit down. He watched her fold her hands. He watched her set the paper bag on her lap. He did not move her. Sievert was at the gurney with Ada, and she was focused, completely focused, and she should have been, and she was. But the nurse, Donna, charge nurse, 17 years in this ER, Donna had gone to the desk. She was looking at the intake log. She was looking for the woman in the grey dress. The intake log had 3 entries from the community that morning. Emma Lapp, knee pain, Rachel Lapp, accompanying minor. And one more, a name added when Miriam had gone to the desk 40 minutes ago to confirm Emma's paperwork. Donna read the name. She read it again. She pulled up the hospital's staff directory, the archived one, the version that hadn't been migrated into the new system, where names from 2 and 3 years back still had photographs attached. The photograph was from a hospital ID badge. A young woman in scrubs, hair back, looking directly at the camera with the particular expression of someone who has not slept in 22 hours and does not intend to complain about it. Donna looked at the photograph, looked at the waiting room, at the woman in the plain grey dress with the white cap and the paper bag on her lap. She picked up the phone and called the trauma bay. "Dr. Osi," she said, "I need you to come to the waiting room when you have 90 seconds. Bring nothing. Just come. Dr. Raymond Osei, 34, Johns Hopkins residency, the kind of doctor who keeps a photograph of his first attending on his desk because that's the kind of person he is. Doctor." Osei arrived in the waiting room 2 minutes later. Donna showed him the screen. He went still in the way that people go still when something they thought was history turns out to be present tense. He looked at the woman in the grey dress. He said, "That's Miriam Zook." Donna said, "I know. She trained under Dr. Vasquez. She was finishing her 2nd year when I started my first. I never worked a shift with her directly, but I know her work. Every resident in our program knew her work. Her case notes were in the training binders." A pause. She left before boards. I never knew why. They stood there for a moment. "She saved that little girl," Donna said. Osei looked at the waiting room, at Miriam Zook sitting with her hands folded, paper bag in her lap, eyes down. Not performing patience. Actually patient. The way a person is patient when they have made a genuine peace with waiting. Does she know we pulled her file? No. He straightened. "I need to speak with Dr. Sievert." Sievert was at the nurse's station when Osei found her. She was writing up the incident, Ada's case, the anaphylaxis, the intervention, and she was writing it the way it happened, which said something about her. She was not reshaping it. She was writing that a woman in the waiting room had identified the condition and directed treatment before the medical team had fully assessed. She hadn't written the woman's name yet because she didn't have it. Osei set the printed staff directory page on the desk in front of her. Sievert looked at it, at the photograph, at the name. Miriam Zook, Osei said. Trauma residency, Johns Hopkins. 2 years from boards when she left. Her case management scores are still in the program's training materials. She's cited in 2 peer-reviewed papers on pediatric anaphylaxis protocols. Sievert did not move for a long moment. She's in the waiting room, Donna said from the other side of the station. Not unkind, just accurate. Sievert stood up from the desk. She walked to the waiting room door. She stood in the doorway. Miriam was still in the same chair. Emma Lapp had returned from intake and was sitting beside her, and Miriam was looking at a form, pointing to a line, explaining something quietly in Pennsylvania Dutch. She did not look up immediately. She finished the sentence she was saying to Emma. Then she looked up. She looked at Sievert in the doorway, at the printed page in her hand, at Osei, standing half a step behind. Something moved across Miriam's face. Not surprise, exactly. Something older than surprise. Something like a person who has been waiting for a particular kind of conversation and is not afraid of it. She folded her hands. Dr. Zook, Sievert said. Her voice was careful, the voice of someone choosing each word. I owe you an apology. Ada is all right, Miriam said. She's stable. She's asking for her mother. Miriam nodded once. Then that's what matters. I made an assumption. Based on... Sievert glanced at the cap, the apron, the paper bag. She was honest enough not to finish the sentence in a way that softened what she had done. I was wrong. Miriam looked at her for a moment. Not judging, assessing maybe. The way a person looks at a situation to understand what it needs. You gave the epinephrine, Miriam said. You made the right call when it was yours to make. Ada is alive. A pause. I don't need an apology for the rest of it. Sievert stood there. Rachel Lapp will need someone to sit with her, Miriam said. She speaks some English, but not enough for fear. If you can send someone who will slow down, that will help her. She turned back to Emma's forms. Osei was still standing in the doorway. He hadn't said anything. He didn't say anything now. But before he turned to go back to the trauma bay, he looked at Miriam Zook with an expression that the security guard, who was watching the whole thing from the corner, would describe later as the way you look at someone you should have known about a long time ago. The incident report went up the chain the same afternoon, not because Miriam filed anything. She filed nothing. While she was still in the waiting room, a patient liaison came to her chair and crouched down and asked quietly whether she would like to speak with someone from administration. Miriam looked at her, said she was waiting for a friend's appointment to finish, said she appreciated the thought. The liaison lingered for a moment, as though there was something else she was supposed to say, and then she didn't say it and she left. Miriam waited for Emma Lapp's appointment to finish. She helped Emma to the truck. She drove home. The incident report went up because Donna filed it, because 3 nurses filed witness statements, because the security guard, who had been called to remove the woman in the plain dress and had instead watched her save a child's life, filed a statement of his own, and because Dr. Raymond Osei went to the chief of medicine that evening with the printed page from the staff directory and a 7-minute account of what had happened, and a single clear question, which was, what are we going to do about a system where a woman with those credentials was removed from a patient's side because of what she was wearing? Dr. Sievert was removed from pediatric cases pending a formal review. She was not fired. She would not be fired. She would go through the review, and she would do the work, and she would, by most accounts, become a more careful physician for it. That's not a satisfying ending for people who want satisfaction. It's an accurate one. The hospital's board sent a formal letter to the Lancaster County Amish community acknowledging the incident. The letter was written in plain language. It was addressed, by name, to Miriam Zook. It sat unopened on her kitchen table for 4 days before she read it. She read it once. She folded it back into the envelope. She put it in the drawer where she kept Daniel's things. She didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not that night. Not the next day. Her mother noticed something. Mothers notice things that aren't spoken. and she put a second cup of tea on the table after supper and sat down across from Miriam and waited. This is a thing her mother has always done. She has never in her life pushed. Miriam wrapped her hands around the cup. She looked at the wood stove. Emma's knee is going to be fine, she said. They'll do the injection next month. Her mother nodded. There was a child today, Miriam said. She stopped breathing. Her mother waited. I knew what to do. A pause. Very long. I always know what to do. That's the thing that doesn't go away. You think maybe it'll quiet down. It doesn't. Her mother looked at her. Does that trouble you? Miriam thought about it. Honestly, the way she did everything. No, she said finally. Today it didn't trouble me. Today it was just... She stopped. Ada Lapp is alive. She'll go home and she'll get into trouble and she'll grow up and she'll never know my name. That's right. That's how it should be. Her mother picked up her own cup. Daniel would have liked her, Miriam said. Loud, eating crackers, taking up space. She laughed, small and real and a little broken in the way that laughter is sometimes when the person you're laughing about is gone. Her mother laughed too. They sat there in the kitchen with the wood stove and the tea and the sound of the wind coming down from the north. And Miriam Zook did not resolve anything, did not arrive at peace or conclusion or certainty, did not know, had never known, would perhaps never know, whether she had made the right choice when she came home. She knew she had made a choice. She was living it. Today that child had breathed. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. 3 days later, Rachel Lapp came to the Zook farm. She came in the early morning, before the light had fully settled, and she brought Ada with her. Ada, who was entirely loudly herself again, who ran to the fence to look at the horses and had to be called back twice. Rachel stood at the door with a covered dish and the expression of a woman trying to find words for something that doesn't have them. Miriam took the dish. She stepped back from the door to let them in. She wants to thank you herself, Rachel said. I told her she didn't have to say much, just... Ada had found the horses. Miriam watched her through the kitchen window. 7 years old, coat too big, hat knocked crooked by the wind. She doesn't need to say anything, Miriam said. Rachel sat down at the table. She looked at her hands. The doctor, the one who... They told me she's not allowed to work with children anymore, for now. She hesitated. Is that because of you? No, Miriam said, and it was true. I didn't file anything. Someone did. Yes. Rachel looked up. Was it right? What happened to her? Miriam thought about Sievert in the doorway with the printed page in her hand, choosing her words, not softening what she'd done. I think she'll be a better doctor for it, she said. That's what I think. They drank coffee. Ada came in from the horses with mud on her boots, and a story about a brown one that was definitely smiling. Ma'am, I saw it, it was smiling. And Rachel said, Horses don't smile, Ada. And Ada said, This one did, with the absolute certainty of a child who has recently survived something and has decided the world is on her side. Miriam watched her. She thought about Daniel. She always thought about Daniel. That was not going to stop. She had stopped waiting for it to stop. She thought about the waiting room floor, the child's neck under her fingers, the clock on the wall. She thought about Sievert's face when she'd looked at the directory photograph. The moment when a person understands that they have made an error, not of malice but of assumption, and the error had weight, and now they have to carry it. She did not feel satisfaction about that. She felt something more complicated, something like, I hope she carries it the right way. Something like, I hope it makes her careful. That was the most she had for it. When Rachel and Ada left, Miriam walked out to the barn. She had work to do. She always had work to do. The cold came down flat and clean from the north, the way it does in February in Lancaster County, and the horses shifted in their stalls, and somewhere across the fields a crow was making noise about something, and the whole morning was ordinary in the way she had come back here to find. Ordinary like a choice you make every day without regret, even when the choosing costs you something you're not sure you can name. She did not know if she had made the right choice coming home. She did not know if what she had given up was worth what she had come back to. She knew that a child was alive this morning, who had not been alive by any right 3 days ago in a waiting room 40 minutes east. She knew that her hands had been the reason. She knew that her hands had then folded themselves around a cup of tea and let the rest of it go. She pulled her coat closed. She went to work. Some knowledge stays in the body long after the life that built it is over. Some choices don't ask you to justify them. They just ask you to keep making them. She fed the horses. She did not think about what her name was on any wall in any building in any city. She thought about Ada Lapp, smiling at a horse through the fence. She thought, that's enough. That's the whole thing right there. She thought, ja. And she went inside.